I place a really big value on human innovation and human ingenuity. I see everything great in the world as coming from this. You're going to have to get comfortable cold approaching people or figuring out ways to get your product in front of people. You're probably going to need to be clever about it. You're going to need to have a thick skin because you're going to be wrong a lot. You're going to get rejected a lot. But if you keep at it and you persevere and you're curious and you try, you'll get through these things.
I do want to change gears here and talk about the LPNH. What are your thoughts on some of its controversies?
I think that there's an intent to do is to invalidate this existing moral framework and to show that this other moral framework is possible. We want to attract people who share our values and are attracted to the fact that we believe in these values strongly and we don't back down in the support of those values.
There are few within the liberty movement who are as direct or as uncompromising in their beliefs as Jeremy Kauffman. A tech entrepreneur turned libertarian activist, Kauffman has earned both scorn and admiration for his work with the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire, as well as with the Mises Caucus. I spoke with him in hopes of learning more about the ideas that drive him, as well as what he hopes to accomplish going forward. This is episode 27 of Morgan Meets the Eye, in which Jeremy discusses his work with the LPNH, his experiences as an entrepreneur, and how he believes that the philosophy of non-aggression can be applied realistically, among other subjects. Hello, Jeremy. Thanks for the appearance. And before we get into our discussion today, where should people go to learn more about you? And what organizations are you affiliated with that they should also look into?
It's great to be here with you today. I am probably at this point just most well known for what I post on X, which is kind of a weird thing to be known for. And I don't want to act like that many people know who I am for that reason. But I do a lot of impressions on X at the handle Jeremy Kauffman. I've been a tech CEO. I'm former executive director of the Free State Project. I'm very involved in the libertarian movement inside of New Hampshire, this movement to concentrate libertarians inside of New Hampshire. So I do a lot of podcasts talking about that. But for most people who know me probably know me for my posts on X. I have 175,000 followers or something on there.
Okay, nice. So before we get into anything else, I should also probably, mention as well that, I've met you, in the past as well. We actually met through a mutual friend of ours, LiquidZulu. So basically, about a little over a month ago, he came to visit you over in New Hampshire. Basically, I was part of his entourage along with some of his objectivist friends. And basically, so what happened was, just for anybody listening in, the story is that, we met with you at a bar. And because LiquidZulu had a foreign, Scottish license, they were not accepting that and they would not allow him to drink alcohol. And I did notice that in the interaction, when the waitress broke this news to you, you did, tell her, pointedly that, you would not be tipping her and that we would be leaving the bar automatically, very immediately. And I did notice as well that when she did give you the check, I did notice you kind of yanked it out of her hands, in a curt manner as well. So basically, I did notice this, and a part of me was actually quite impressed to see how you were able to manage this level of conflict and how you did not back down from this particular confrontation. And I do think that, libertarians, just like any group really, do struggle with the courage needed to really stand up to people and to refuse to essentially back down from them. So I'm kind of curious, if this is a particular trait that you had to work to learn, to ingrain in yourself, or if you've just always been this way, or what your particular philosophy is when managing conflicts with others.
Well, I do want to be clear in terms of that particular situation, which I would stand by what happened there. That's not immediately go to conflict, right? It's just, and actually, I wouldn't even say it was a conflict in the sense we had a polite conversation, about what was possible, and it's well, if you're not going to serve my friend, then I'm going to leave. I wasn't insulting to her. I wasn't rude to her. And so, to me, we should always start by being polite, right? But some people get trapped in, they only want to be nice, right? They only want to be polite, And I do think that that's an incorrect way of going about things, right? People, I think, by default, you just deserve to be treated with respect, deserve to be treated politely. But if someone is politely, not respecting you, like the government can often quote be polite, in terms of the tone of speech. Tyrants can use nice language, and I'm not claiming the waitress was a tyrant. The waitress was I mean, you would say she was attempting to do her job, but honestly, even there, she wasn't. Like, she could have just given a beer to a guy, and no one would have known. So she's choosing to be, a policy automaton of her job, and it may be the case that she would risk her job if she chooses to serve this person. Okay, that's fine, but like the incentives have to change somewhere, and so something, something that happens all the time with government, but it happens in corporations, it happens in all kinds of entities where you create this chain of decisions, of procedures, of people, of whatever it is, and somehow you get this emergent outcome that's like completely nonsensical, but every individual link in the chain gets to feel like they're a good person, right? Every individual link in the chain, I'm just doing my job, and I think when you're in situations like this, you have to find, some place to put pressure. So there was no law that required them to do this. This was a policy of the establishment, right? It is neither New Hampshire law nor federal law that says that you cannot accept an international ID to serve someone alcohol, right? There's not a law that says that. This is a policy of the establishment. So if the establishment is going to have a policy that doesn't serve my guests, then like, why would I stay there? And in terms of, and by the way, we hadn't been there for very long. So when I'm saying I'm not tipping the waitress, this wasn't like we'd been there for hours and ordered meals. Like, we'd had one round of drinks, and so, yeah, I have to change the incentives, somehow. So my intent there is to be firm, to be resolute in my stance, but I actually wasn't trying to be a jerk to her. That can be a fine line to walk, because often being firm and standing up for yourself can feel like a jerk to the other side. But I wasn't trying to be mean to her. I don't think I insulted her. I don't think I was crude to her in any way. But I was just firm and resolute about my position, which is, well, if you're not going to serve my friends, then we're not going to stay here. So that was that interaction. I guess I probably have had somewhat of an inclination to, stand up for myself generally, or to speak up generally. But it's also something that you can practice. And situations like a waitress, like there's no stakes here. There's literally nothing at stake at either side. So if you have trouble, asserting yourself in a situation like this, I do think that this is a good thing to practice. You can practice with innocent interactions with cops. You can practice with innocent interactions with businesses, and asserting yourself again. It's not about being mean. It should be about being firm and clear. But asserting yourself is not, attacking someone or being rude necessarily.
I do think, it was handled well, and, the story did have a happy ending anyway. We did get to, visit with you and, your associates at the Quill, at that particular libertarian clubhouse that you have, essentially. And, and LiquidZulu was certainly able to get his alcohol by the end of the day. But um, but aside from that,
he's a talented drinker, that Scottish man. Yeah,
that he certainly is. I was impressed by how much he was able to hold down. But in regards to the issue of conflict and, dealing with opposition from, opposing sides, I know that you've also spoken about, your status as a father and your experience that you've had raising your children. And, you've talked about having, male and female children, and surprise, surprise, the experience doing that is a bit different for them. So I'm kind of curious, just basically, what your experience has really been, how you integrate these libertarian principles into it, and just what advice you would give people who are trying to raise children, who are essentially new to being parents.
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. So I have 4 children, ages 1 through 7. My youngest is the girl. So I actually know the least about raising girls, and to be honest with you, raising a girl is actually the most intimidating for me. It's more intimidating than raising male children. And in terms of raising your children and mixing them with your political beliefs, like I do want to propagate my values, but I actually don't see my libertarian values as, and I differ from a lot of libertarians here. I see them as at least somewhat of a personal preference rather than objectively correct. Like I can give you the objectively correct arguments, and I'm not going to say that my brain like doesn't think that they're true, but other people have all these arguments for their beliefs, so to me, like I would love my kids, if they were socialists or whatever. I wouldn't want them to live in New Hampshire, but I would love them nonetheless. And so, in terms of raising your kids, so how do my beliefs influence raising my kids? I mean, I give my kids a lot of trust, a lot of leeway. I try to let them make their own mistakes. If they tell me that they think they can do something, I try to trust them in that, even if it makes me a little bit uncomfortable or a little bit nervous, at least within a wide domain of things. Like, if my kid says, I want to put my fork in the electrical outlet, obviously you're not gonna trust them on literally everything. But there's a whole set of things, I certainly like going to the playground and this kind of thing where, I watch some other parents and they're clearly, more concerned, more timid, more trepidatious with what they let their children do. And, I'm like, hey, if you think you can jump off of that, you can jump off of that. I think one of the tests that I use is if a risk is sort of within their evolutionary bounds, their evolutionary experience, like kids, like have been jumping off of stuff for, since before we were humans, right? Like when proto-humans jumped off of stuff. We have a lot of training there to be able to judge whether we can jump off of something, right? We don't have training about whether we can, with electricity is something we don't have evolutionary experience to. So I tend to use this as a test. So like things inside the set of like, we've experienced this for a long time. I tend to trust my children's judgment substantially. I might watch them. I might be there for them. I might warn them. I might explain, hey, this would be dangerous or whatever. But I let my 5 and my 7-year-old, they start fires. They have axes to chop wood, which they love doing. They just like to take the axes and go out. And we don't even have a fireplace. I let my kids, they go out in the backyard and there's like, can we start a fire? I'm like, sure, go ahead. And the first couple of times I watched them, to make sure. And once they've done it a couple of times, they have a set of procedures. They say, hey, you've got to have water nearby. These are the safety procedures and you have to follow them. But I trust them. My 7-year-old, and I try to encourage, I think, and this is also partially motivated by my own experience from being a child, where I often felt that a lot of adults, although not my parents, notably, my parents, I think, parented me in a way relatively similar to the way that I'm parenting my children. In fact, if anything, I'm actually stricter than my parents. But other adults, wanted to treat me like a child when I felt that I ought not to be treated that way. And so I actually remember vowing all the way back to being a child that I wouldn't do that to others as I've grown up. And so that comes to both how I raise my own kids, how I interact with other kids, and it comes to how I interact with even young adults. I've hired a 16-year-old and given him a full-time programming job because he was a 16-year-old who could do a full-time programming job. And so I try to and also, by the way, a smart 7-year-old does just as well in a standardized math test as like a 30th percentile 18-year-old. Okay, so we also, I think, part of we don't always recognize or appreciate how bright and talented at least some kids can be. And I'm not even saying all of my kids are at that level or whatever. I don't even know yet. I haven't given them a standardized test, but this is objectively true. Like a 99th percentile 7-year-old, is like very close to average on math as like an 18-year-old, which is like kind of shocking. But it appears to be. Maybe it's not 50th percentile. It might be like 30th percentile or something, or a little bit lower. But it's like it's much closer than you might guess. And so I try to treat children that way. And by the way, a 5-year-old's brain is 90 to 95% fully developed. Right. They obviously have a ton of training to go through. And then there's a pruning phase that happens neurologically in puberty. But in terms of brain volume and brain size and neurons, this is why when kids turn 5, it's such a breakthrough for people who aren't parents that might not know this, but like generally, like when your kids turn around 5, you find that your child is all of a sudden like capable in all these ways that they weren't before, and that's because their brain is basically full size, is near full size in terms of the amount of neurons and connections that will exist within the brain. And so that brain has undergone very little training. It has a lot to learn about the world, but it is not like the brain is not growing that much from that point on. Maybe it grows like another like 10% in volume or something like this from 5 all the way through puberty. So I think our society has become sort of very infantilized, and I try to be the opposite of that. One other thing I'll say here, I've been talking for a while on this already, though, is that if you nerd out on what impacts child outcomes, if you try to really consult like good studies and good analysis of what matters, one of the things that appears to matter an incredible amount, arguably, I actually think there's some decent evidence that this single decision weighs more than every other decision you'll make as a parent combined. And this is, what is the peer group that your child is embedded within? So what's the shared community of your child? Because so many of the influences on your children come from outside the household. They come from their peers, they come from their school, they come from the other adults that they interact with. And this was actually a big impetus in me moving to New Hampshire and choosing to raise my children in New Hampshire. I came from Philadelphia. That's where I was living. Maybe it was a little bit libertarian-ish, but a lot of the people were progressives, like kind of the better form of progressives. Like they were tech people, they were smart people, but they were liberals, and they were a little bit neurotic by my standards. And it just they weren't people that I wanted to raise my children around, even though I liked them, actually. I disagreed with them on some political issues, but I did like them. But it wasn't the community to raise my kids. Whereas here in New Hampshire, although I'm not literally in New Hampshire right now, the community for raising your kids is amazing. So literally last week, my kids went to a farm and participated in the processing of chickens. So they helped slaughter chickens. They helped do all the steps that get a chicken, ready to be eaten. You defeather it and you do all these steps. I actually know very little about this, but I think it's so cool that the farm owner, who's also a free stater, invites children out to learn about this. He does firearms lessons for kids. He lets kids learn to weld. At PorkFest last year, he did a motorcycle teardown, a motorcycle engine teardown, a 2-stroke engine teardown for children. And they spent like an hour or two taking apart the engine, learning about all the parts and this kind of thing. And I think this is like so healthy for kids to be experiencing. And the other parents that I'm around, if my kid, jumps off something that like, even in my own head, I'm like, is he gonna be okay here? Like, people are okay with it, and no one's gonna like, look at me weird and this kind of thing. So I think that's so big that they're getting reinforcement of these values, not just from me, but from everyone around them. And I think that is actually one of the single best reasons for libertarians to live in New Hampshire is the community that's available for raising your kids, because there's this whole network of schools, there's thousands of parents, there's these homeschooling networks and this kind of thing. And so there's really nothing else like it, anywhere in the country.
Going off of in regards to what you were saying about, peer groups as well, the importance of that, I do think that even as adults, there's still it can still be challenging to resist the mob mentality that often takes place. I do believe that, people often go along with the thoughts that they see simply because they're seeing other people come along with those thoughts. I think that there is some type of psychological phenomena where people think, well, there's all of them and there's only one of me. Who am I to disagree? But as far as children, it seems as though there's some influence of, the respecting of private property, at least, and as we often know, children can sometimes have a challenging time understanding this concept of, private property. But do you think that as a parent, you've put any more emphasis on this concept than somebody who is of a different belief system would have?
Probably. We definitely talk about, are these things, your property? What are your rights to interact with these things? And in terms of inside of my own household, we have a concept of is this family property, or this is a communist term, but is it personal property? Is it, but this is how we handle it, right? Because you have kids, you don't want each toy to be owned by a child. So we have family property. Family property has its own rules, but my children do have their own personal property, and so their personal property has to be stored upstairs in their bedroom. They have shelves in places that their property belongs, and the other children can't take their property or touch their property without asking the owner of that property. Family property has different rules, in terms of how it has to get shared and how it can be accessed and this kind of thing. And of course, there are things that are dad's property or mom's property or parents' property. But we certainly talk about property regularly. I think my children could explain that relatively decently.
Right, yes. Now, kind of going off of that and kind of discussing more in general of what your own belief system is, what would you say it is that you're really fighting for as a cause, you yourself, in the most specific terms you could possibly use? I know that there are obviously concepts such as we're fighting for decentralization. We want to oppose government inefficiency. We see that there's a lot of forced compassion for, unproductive and unskilled members of society. Now, at the risk of sounding a bit harsh, I understand, for example, that I'm not conceited or detached enough from reality to proclaim myself to be highly skilled or outrageously talented, but I do understand logic and morality enough to at least see the error and the inconsistency in myself demanding that other people's own talent and potential be thwarted for my own benefit, whether it's coercing them to fulfill, my material needs, or simply just clipping their wings, simply because their greater ability and status might pose a threat to my own sense of accomplishment. But this is basically just, my own philosophy and the ideas that drive me. I'm just saying, in this case, what exactly would you say that is your main cause? If you had to break it down into a thesis statement, how would you approach the matter?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say that while I'm certainly persuaded by sort of both the deontological argument for libertarianism, I own myself, and and you own yourself, and so therefore there are certain things that ought to be true about what duties we have in terms of how we interact with each other. And I'm also persuaded by the consequentialist arguments, such as from David Friedman or Michael Huemer, that anarcho-capitalism or things in that direction literally create better outcomes for people. But if I'm honest, what personally animates me the most is I place a really big value on human innovation and human ingenuity. I see everything great in the world as coming, from this. And that the fact that we're able to have this conversation, where I'm actually in Utah right now, you're in, I believe, Massachusetts.
Rhode Island, to be exact.
Rhode Island, sorry. I guess I don't know if that's better or worse. But we have,
I would say it's worse.
There's all this, there's an incredible amount of human work that went into this, an incalculable amount of work, right? We don't even know how to produce a pencil, so let alone the complexity that went into something like this. And I find so much beauty in this. I actually regularly think about and try to derive happiness from the fact that I was not born, 10,000 years ago, and that I'm in this modern world that's beautiful and full of all of these things. And it really is better than, what came before. I have no fear, that my children are ever going to want for food or are going to get eaten by an animal, let alone all the amenities and all the things that are possible. And very little to none of that came from government, and all of it came from, a lot of it came from individual humans who were creative or insightful or highly talented. And I want to unleash as much of that as possible. I want humans to go to Mars. I want us to cure cancer. I want us to do as many impressive and great things as possible. That's what's motivated me, to be an entrepreneur in my own life. And it's substantially government that is in the way of that. Almost always it's government that's in the way of that. It's government that slows it down. And that is definitely a big motivating factor for me. And it's also motivating for me in terms of, my excitement about New Hampshire, because I think it is possible to create a society that is aligned along those values, and that society could achieve so much more. I think so much more wealth and achievement is possible than what's happening today. I buy into the sort of Tyler Cowen thesis about stagnation, as well as Peter Thiel. I guess I'd probably even give more credit to, in terms of my influence, Peter Thiel. Like, what's going on? Like, why don't we have flying cars? Why don't we have nanotechnology? Why aren't we terraforming the earth? These kinds of things, because I think there's so much that's possible, and I want both a government, but I also want a culture. And this is, I maybe even deviate a little bit from sort of traditional libertarianism here, which is like, I want a culture that reinforces these things. I want to opt into that culture, right? I believe in things being voluntary, but like I want a society and a culture that reinforces and pushes those things, in that direction.
You discuss the harsher life that we had to lead, let's say 10,000 years ago. And, one concept that I see, people will often kind of dismiss the economic system of capitalism. They'll talk about how it was originally established around the time of Adam Smith, they might say, around the wealth of nations. But I do find that a lot of people overlook that the concept of private property as an institution really goes back, I would say, I believe it's estimated around 12,000 years ago. The first agricultural age really happened, and that was when we started seeing at least some taking on, among primitive man of the actual, institution of private property.
Yeah, well, that was the development of farming, and that was when humans stopped being tribal, and we lived in a single place. Well, not all humans, immediately, but that was the transition from being hunter-gatherer tribes to being agricultural farmers. It was a very costly transition. Humans got shorter. It wasn't even good for us at first, which is an interesting thing to kind of learn. But I actually think like you could make an argument that private property goes even farther back. Maybe that's the first sort of formalization of it. But look, wolves understand private property, right? In the sense that wolf packs have territories and they respect each other's territories. That the animals in nature, and then we can go beyond wolves. I mean, an incredible amount of animals essentially establish a territory for themselves and attempt to violently defend that territory in an exclusionary way, right? So this is my territory. Other animals, if you come onto or into this space, like I will hurt you. I just maybe this is more like a fun argument. It's just like, what do we really mean by private property here? But like, I would be like tempted to make the argument that like a lot of animals understand private property in the sense that at least they understand territory. Maybe so that's certainly not formal private property and all of the things that you can derive from that, as human cultures can do. But this idea that that there needs to be exclusionary access or ownership to area or things, I think is just clearly necessary. I don't really know what arguments could be. And again, even the communists ultimately accept this, which is why they come up with like these carve outs. So I was like, oh, well, you can have personal property, so pretty much I think everyone gets this idea that there needs to be ownership of at least some things. Libertarians, I think, take it to logical and productive conclusions, but no human actually believes in like communal ownership or like non-personal ownership of everything, right? Everyone gets that we need to have ownership of things. And then of course, when you adopt those rules strongly, then you can get these really cool outcomes called markets. But yeah.
The word that comes to mind for me is consistency. Libertarians are consistent with the concept of private property. They don't only follow it to a certain point.
So I like all this stuff and these arguments. And so when I'm about to say, I'm not in any way trying to say like that these arguments are wrong, but I think it's important to ultimately, and maybe I do again deviate from some libertarians here. It's like we have to ultimately tie these back to self-interest. And I think libertarian arguments totally can. So I'm not trying to reject them. But look, if private property and these kinds of structures aren't ultimately in the evolutionary interest of humans, aren't ultimately in the evolutionary interest of whoever adopts them, then they won't succeed, right? So I don't. maybe this does ultimately make me a consequentialist. I always actually struggle with whether I'm a, what my actual ethical system is, because when I read both types of arguments, I'm like, well, these both seem good to me. But I do think at the end of the day, like if it turned out that like there's all these logically sound arguments for for libertarian ethics, but they result in you like dying or not having children, like I don't know, like would I cling, how when it's life or death, will I cling to my strong belief in private property? Now I think in modernity, these scenarios are very rare to non-existent, right? It is almost never actually life or death where someone needs to violate libertarian ethics to save themselves. But if you're talking about zombie scenarios, lifeboat scenarios, I would like to believe that I would still be moral, but I find the arguments harder to make. Yeah, that's a thought.
I can understand the angle you're coming from there. I do believe there are a lot of people within the libertarian community who might claim that there really isn't this type of tension between, what's best for us and what works philosophically. They might claim that, libertarianism, for example, as a philosophy, is obviously most palatable to people who can run their own lives, essentially, who are capable, who are able to, do things individually. But they might claim that, it's while, people who happen to be in this position may be more favorable towards libertarianism rather than other people who are more prone to essentially leech off of others. They might say that it's not really that they're biased in it because it happens to be the most functional system. They might say that it happens to be the one that would work best for establishing, a thriving society.
Yeah, and again, I tend to agree with these arguments. As someone who likes sort of contriving hypotheticals and maybe not being contrarian for its own sake, but trying to find the exceptions, like trying to find the holes, the edge cases, whatever. I think it's easy to contrive scenarios where you're strictly abiding libertarian ethics, like might not literally be in your self-interest. Again, in the real world, in modernity, like I don't think I've ever experienced, like I don't think these are experiences I've had in my life. So I'm not trying to say that they're happening regularly. I will also add that when you're doing this type of analysis in libertarianism, and I think this is something that the sort of like economic analyses can lack, is that I think a lot of human behavior is actually motivated by not economic, sort of outcomes, but by sort of social status, type of outcomes. And so I think it's at least plausible, and I also think this potentially explains a lot of the rejection of libertarianism, which is also something I look for, right? So, like, why do so many people disagree with me? Why do so many people not share or do not find compelling, the same things that I find compelling? And I think, like, one of the explanations for this is that humans are very sensitive around status. We were in these tribal bands prior to the farming, and funnily enough, the farming era is actually when humans became more comfortable with status differentials. Prior to the farming area, like we spent 200,000 years in these tribal bands that were pretty egalitarian. Like there may have been an alpha, but often the alpha was very controlled by this by the sort of group, the rest of the group. So it wasn't the alpha was in no way later monarchs actually had greater greater independence and greater autonomy and greater authority than say the alpha in one of these tribal sort of egalitarian bands. And so we have these impulses to like not let someone accumulate too many resources or like not let someone accumulate too much power and this kind of thing. And so these impulses, I think, fire. And so, if someone can, make everyone, quote, better off economically or in terms of prosperity, but the impulse feels like, oh, well, that person would be too high. And I don't think people are literally thinking of it this way in their own head. So I'm not trying to say like people are like doing this calculation.
Right, unconscious.
Yeah. It's but I think that this is This is a part of this is actually probably this line of thinking generally is, I kind of got through all of basic and advanced libertarianism by the time I was 30, and I'm 40 now. So, I would say this is sort of, if I have any add-on to make to the greats who came before me here, like this is where what I think they're missing a little bit is this, I was rereading, is it Rothbard talks about like this sort of like the natural elites and this kind of thing. I think a number of libertarian thinkers use that term. And, I've actually grown like a bit skeptical of these claims, because I don't think, like, it is true that in these egalitarian bands, you did end up having like a leader who arose, naturally, but there's a ton of politics, like there's a ton of gossiping, and you had the same types of behaviors that you have now where, a gang of people who were less strong, like ganged up and checked that person. And so like it was very common all the way back in egalitarian tribal societies for for the best hunter, to kind of hide a little bit of his hunting ability, because he didn't, because there were expectations, to give to the group, in this kind of thing. And so, this stuff, the social factors that and the psychological factors that drive, communism, socialism, and I think all of leftism generally, like they've been with us for a very, very long time. And they probably have, like any aspect of our behavior, like evolutionary reasons, behind them. And so I think it is plausibly in the self-interest of some to reduce everybody. Like it could be, it could be in someone's evolutionary self-interest to make everybody worse off if it changes their, distribution in the hierarchy, and it changes their, mating options and this kind of thing. And so I think that is like an important thing for libertarians to consider.
I do think we're getting into some pretty deep subject matter here, discussing, the idea of, people being motivated as, let's say their status, let's say their ego, their particular perception of themselves being something that's very important to them. And just on the concept of ego, I mean, this is obviously something that Ayn Rand herself has also spoken on rather extensively as a concept. So this
She was very good on. She was a bit right. Envy is evil, right? Like Ayn Rand was, and this is where I think she's a libertarian. But if this is a left-right spectrum, she was as far right, as you can kind of get, in the sense that she was like very against. She was very individualistic. She was very against checking yourself in any way, and she didn't want people. She was so hostile to people of lesser, ability or whatever, ganging up on the man or the woman of greater ability, and that is, I think that is, obviously like part of libertarian thought, but I actually think inside of the libertarian sphere, maybe this will be good for some of the other stuff you want to talk about, or you can come back to it. Like this is one of the areas of disagreement inside the quote, like school of libertarianism, because getting government out of the way and making society more voluntary, like doesn't actually say that much about things here.
Right, yes. And where I was going with this is, if we look at the concept of ego and people being motivated by their, let's say, status or something to achieve here, I wanted to draw a line between this concept and something you were talking about earlier, which is, you being guided by the concept of essentially human achievement, human production, really. And what do you think is the biggest misconception people tend to make about, man's achievement here, or people who produce or accomplish great things? Do you think that it is that these people are achieving great things for the sake of their status? Do you think that it's for, what exactly is the reason you think that they're going for it? And do you think that that a lot of the hostility towards them is unjustified?
There's a lot there, because it's complex. I think this is very complex. I think most people, it's a mix of both. There's that Adam Smith quote about like man desires to be loved and to be lovely, or something like that. So people like the idea of being known and being appreciated as someone who made things better for other people, for who they improve their society, they helped their group, their team, get better, get stronger, not die, these kinds of things. So is it, I think ultimately we should almost always start with the prior, that human behavior is motivated by evolutionary self-interest, as like that should be our prior for the behavior of all living things. Now, that doesn't mean humans live in groups. We work together as groups. And then, by the way, this is a beautiful part of being human. I'm a human who likes joining groups. I'm not a human who needs to always be at the top of everything. I'm happy to play my role. I've been thrilled to make a great sports team and be the worst player on the team, and I just want to like do my job, which is like not mess it up the 1 minute I'm on the field, So I think this is. So I think it's a mix, basically like no one is doing this out of like pure altruism. Like people aren't like anonymously, inventing things and making the world better. People who invent things and make the world better, like they want to be known for that. But then that does mean that, if you're treating like mating and evolutionary pairing as zero sum, like wealth is positive sum, like wealth and assets and productivity is a clearly positive sum game. So we can both get richer, we can both benefit. Now I don't think status and evolutionary productivity sort of are strictly zero sum, right? Because in a wealthier society, I can have more kids and you can have more kids and we both win. But it is closer to zero sum than I think wealth itself is, right? And so innovations, I think, if you look at them from the perspective of productivity, if you look at it economically, it's like wholly positive sum. There's like nothing to dislike. Only if you look at it from this sort of status or evolutionary side, does it start to make sense for someone to not, why do so many environmentalists not like Elon Musk, the man who did more for electric vehicles, than anyone else in the world, and I think the answer is because he is a kind of Randian character. He's the closest thing we have to, a John Galt who's living today, in the sense that he's like shaping the world he's one man shaping the world with his will. And that is the thing that triggers this egalitarian leveling impulse, more than any other thing in humans. And so, there are people who feel that impulse. They're like, that ape is getting too strong, and we need to hit him with rocks, so that he doesn't think he's so strong. And I am very against that kind of impulse. I think it is very good to develop cultural practices against that kind of impulse. I think the best societies have done that, actually. You go through the 10 Commandments, and how many of them are saying things that are along this line? They're trying to discourage envy. They're trying to discourage look at yourself. Focus on yourself. And so you can look at like successful religions, successful societies, like tended to adopt these sort of anti-envy tenets and practices. But that's a group base. So it's good for the group. When groups are in competition with other groups, it's good to have these kinds of practices. But inside of the group, it could potentially be. So I don't think these things are actually. This is maybe, again, a lot of libertarians like to give the answer. It's like, oh, well, it's wholly positive. Everyone's better off. I think it's a little bit more nuanced than that. I think it's like mostly everybody is better off, but maybe not quite everybody. I don't know if I got every part of your question. There's a lot there for me to think about. So if there's a part I missed, feel free to remind me.
What I'm curious about is how would you think these principles actually influenced you personally as somebody who's worked in, the blockchain industry, who's worked in file sharing? I know that you've worked with LBRY. Who obviously has also been linked very much with Odyssey.
I don't know.
Does your business?
The things that I'm saying right now are honestly more things that I've come to understand or think about more in the last like 5 to 10 years. These were not. I wasn't thinking about this stuff when I was starting my first company. These thoughts weren't on my mind, at all. I'm someone who's I've always been intellectually curious. I've always liked, I was an entrepreneur at a really young age, before I even knew what the word was. I was the kind of kid who was always like hustling and like trying to find a way to make a buck or whatever. And so I think that like, and that didn't even really come from my parents. So that was probably something that was like at least a little bit, within me or whatever. I was early on the internet. I think that helped. There were some interesting influences that I was able to find as a teenager that were much better than what I was getting in school, or even from my parents. I mean, my parents were very kind to get me a computer and let me go on the internet as much as I wanted. So I'm very appreciative of them for that. But like a lot of the ideas that ended up being influential to me came from the internet, and not from my school and not from my parents. And honestly, not even from my peer group. I mean, you call the internet my peer group, but it wasn't from my peer group in high school. It was from people on the internet. So, but that desire to make things or to come up with something, to find, I get really excited by the idea of like, figuring something out that someone else hasn't seen, figuring out like that. It doesn't have to like literally be a trick. It could be something that takes, it could be a technical product that takes thousands and thousands of hours of work, but like figuring out, it's like, oh, we could do this. Like, what if we did this way? Would that be better? I'm very motivated by, efficiency, finding, not in a bad way, but like shortcuts. Like what's a way to do this in a better way? And that kind of thinking has been with me my whole life. I always played video games that let me think that way as a kid. And so there is probably some, innateness to those inclinations.
Right.
I mean, even reading Rand, I read Rand at 16. I was like, this is amazing, which obviously other people read Ayn Rand and they're like, this is garbage. So, there's something to, it's reading. I have this bit about how like being a libertarian is like kind of like being gay. Cause if you read about, homosexuals, you're kind of discovering, it's like, they'll like read some book and all of a sudden they'll realize like, oh my God, I'm gay. It's like, that's kind of how I feel like reading Rand. It's like, because obviously a lot of people hate Rand. I read Rand like, this is amazing. So it really resonated with me. It obviously doesn't resonate like a lot of people, anti-resonates with. So the fact that the same material can, resonate with one person and like anti-resonate with another person, I think has to reflect some kinds of innate differences between those two people.
I myself, I have had ambitions of starting my own business and being an entrepreneur in the future. And, I'm nowhere near as developed as you are in this area. But, in my case, I didn't really get this impulse until after I'd already gotten into libertarianism. And I can definitely say that, this principle of individualism and essentially being in control of one's own, I don't want to say destiny. I feel like that's kind of a cliched term, but in control of one's own activities is a very appealing concept for me. And just this idea of having this own concept, that this own business that I can call my own property, is very alluring as well. And I do understand that, entrepreneurship can be a very rough experience as well. And it is something that, it's certainly not for everybody and it shouldn't be as romanticized as it is. But I'm just kind of curious if you have any particular advice for people like me who are in the early stages of this particular path.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different forms of entrepreneurship. But I would say, I guess, first and foremost, like anything else, it's like you get better at it through practice. And it doesn't matter what you're doing, like, especially, whatever form of entrepreneurship you're in, you're going to have to sell stuff. Like you're going to have to find customers, or users, or like whatever you want to call them. You're going to have to get someone to consume or interact with, or whatever your thing is. And so there's all of these, I would say, however you can, like it's just like so good to practice it. I mean, humans get better at everything through practice. And so I think a mistake that some people can make, not saying you, is they, like after A, B, and C, and D, and like, then I'll be, and only then I'll do it. And it's like, I think you just got to find some way to do it. You got to find some way to make it happen. It can start really small. It can take a long, but if you get it started, and you take that little thing and you nurture it, it can, what, all of a sudden 5 years later, or 10 years later, you'll have something like way bigger than you ever thought, was possible. And so it's about, I think I strongly encourage people to like find a way to get started, because there's so many skills that you're going to want to end up having. And also it can also just like, it might also involve learning that like there are skills that are required that you don't have. And then you need to learn the skill of identifying the people who do have those skills and hiring them. It doesn't, it is helpful to kind of be a jack of all trades as an entrepreneur, but it's not necessary to be able to do like literally everything. That's a cool part of being in a market economy is you can hire other people, and so you can have your network. And but so I would say, find a way to get started. Inside of entrepreneurship, there's sort of probably like two. This is a continuum rather than a strict binary, but then like another big fork is like, are you trying to do a startup? Are you trying to do something that's going to like scale massively and like grow massively? Or are you trying to just, carve out a business that gives you, more personal autonomy and more your personal control, and where it's never going to be more than you or you and 5 people or something like this, and that's sort of, and by the way, like these are both, none of these are better than the other. It's about like what are you trying to achieve, and so if it's that that latter kind of entrepreneurship, then I mean, there's so many ways you can do it, especially if you're motivated like by the autonomy rather than the thing, like what you're building. You're like, well, I just want I want to work 40 hours a week or whatever, and I don't care if I'm like washing windows or appraising houses or being a computer programmer or whatever. But what I want is I want the autonomy. I want to own the products of my own labor. All these things that are appealing. Because and by the way, New Hampshire is full of this type of entrepreneur, right? There's so many people who are they're an electrician, they're a contractor, they're a painter, they're a chef, where it's like it's their business, or it's the chef's business, and he has like three people who work for him, and this kind of thing, this is where it's like you just got to get it's very achievable, like almost a lot of people can do this. You're right that it's not for everyone, and we shouldn't say everyone should be an entrepreneur, but almost anyone who wants to be that type of entrepreneur can be. Like there's probably an IQ floor here still, but like it's achievable for like a substantial amount of Americans.
One thing I have found in that being an entrepreneur is that it's not just about being a producer, but you also have to be a businessman. You also have to essentially have an eye for public relations, for being able to communicate sales as well, and in this regard, I do think that some people kind of overlook this aspect. Essentially, and also having to be a businessman in regards to being a producer. And I also think that the government, in addition to this, can also certainly play a very much a counterproductive role as well. Many certain industries are very regulated. The industry I'm in is particularly regulated in the food industry. But I'm kind of curious what your take is on this, as regards to government regulation of these industries. I don't know what type of experience you had, in your particular field, if you had to deal with opposition through regulations from government, or what you were allowed to do, what you were forbidden from doing.
Well, I was attracted to tech because it is a field that is comparatively low regulation, but of course my most recent company was basically sued out of existence by the by the SEC. So I'm certainly familiar with running into regulations and regulations being a problem. I mean, this is another one where it's like, yeah, like all this stuff matters, and I'm not trying to say you should ignore it. And by the way, I didn't. I tried to take this stuff very seriously, and still ended up in trouble. But there's also like maybe a lesson in that, like which is that it's like can be kind of random. Like I think there are a bunch of people who didn't try remotely as hard as I did to comply with the regulations, and they didn't get in any trouble at all. So, I think like I wouldn't ignore them. I think you should. I think you should try to comply with them, unless you're trying to be like some agorist, like under the table type entrepreneur, which is never something that I was trying to do. So I think you should try to comply with them, and and you're not going to go to jail if you do it wrong. Like that's not something that happens. You might get fined a bunch of money, which is something that happens and happened to me, but not personally though, just the business. And then, this is also, there's a great, a great, I don't know if we call it an innovation because it's actually debatable under libertarian theory, but we have something in America called the corporate shield and limited liability. So form a corporation, do your work under that corporation. You got a lot of protection. So you're at, like, you have to be pretty negligent or really do something pretty wrong for your personal assets to be at risk or things like this. So again, I would say, like, I'm not trying to say to like totally YOLO it, but there's more. From what I'm hearing from you, you probably should YOLO it like a little bit more. It's different. I wouldn't tell everyone to YOLO. I've seen people YOLO it too much. So like there's Aristotelian golden mean here. But if you're struggling to get started, you should probably YOLO a little more. And just go for it. And if you fail, you fail, and you'll learn. Yeah, you will learn that sales and communication are incredibly important. I learned that was a big thing for me to go through. Starting my first business. My first business was, my first successful business was this, this software as a service product. And I started by selling it where it's like, I would literally give people the product. And I would be like, here's the product. And 98% of people could not evaluate the product that way. They couldn't, it was how I would have done it. Because that's how I was like, I'm like, just let me drive the car. Just get out of my way. I'll figure out if I want it or not. This isn't most people, it turns out, right? So most people, in terms of how they decide they're going to, buy a product, really need, they need a bunch of assurances. They're very concerned with what other peers and other people in their, circle are going to say about at least for the product I was selling. That can vary. But my sales experience was so different from what I expected because I was mirroring other people as being like me, and they aren't. And so people would drop tens of thousands of dollars on this product and have barely eventually, not day one, eventually people were driving tens of thousands of dollars on this product, and they literally had the product and they would barely use it, and they would spend the money on it because other people had spent money on it, or they had the right recommendation, or whatever. And that can be a tricky thing to get started. But it does, yeah, your reputation, the perceptions, these kinds of things are huge factors. They're arguably the primary factor. I mean, you said you're in food. Yeah, I mean, this is my impression, and I admit that I'm not like a foodie or whatever. But my impression is that people's perceptions of restaurants or food, the foods that they buy, are barely correlated with objective reality. In the sense, if you took people and gave them 5 cheeses and made them blind and they had to rate them 1 to 10, they would give you very different answers than if they see all the packaging and
right.
and all of these things. Not to go on for too long, but I actually this ties into I just had something with my kids here. So my kids usually get chocolate milk with dinner, and we switched chocolate milk powders. Okay, and this caused way larger of a conflict than I would have ever expected. So all of my kids join sides, and they're like, no, I only like this one. I'm like, no, I only like the old one. No, the new one's way better. And so for a week in my house, giving my kids chocolate milk for dinner became this huge struggle. And there's all this fighting. And I was like, I made my kids do a double blinded. Actually, no, sorry, it was only single blinded. But I made I knew what was going on. But I made my kids do a single blinded chocolate milk taste test. They couldn't tell the difference between the chocolate milks. They had no idea. This is they literally invented their desire to prefer one or the other milk over the other. They couldn't. Only one of my kids could even consistently, and this may have even been luck, because it wasn't. I didn't do enough trials to even rule out luck. But literally, only one of my kids could even be could be consistent with his. Every single one waffled back and forth between. So they were so convinced, And so I think a ton of products are like this. So not just food, but certainly anything food related is very big here. I guess I'll make one other reference. I like this book by Robin Hanson and Kevin Simler called The Elephant in the Brain. And but a bunch of the chapter that I'm referencing here is actually from an online article by Kevin Simler called Ads Don't Work That Way, which is an interesting article to read for people who are, you're sort of this mindset that want to get into marketing a product. I think it's an informative read.
And, I do think you're certainly touching on something there when you say that, basically the presentation almost appeals more than the product itself in some areas. I would argue that this could very well be one of the factors of why Thomas Edison was historically more successful than Nikola Tesla, simply because of the way he was able to present himself, certain ways he handled things behind the scenes.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we see this story again and again throughout business history. And, look, Jobs and Wozniak at Apple, like Wozniak was complete technical genius, but if you didn't have someone there to take advantage of his quote, take advantage, obviously, like Jobs' value add was tremendous. So it's a weird use of take advantage, but this side of of hustle, I don't know what you would call it, hustling, you're figuring out the right way. And I'm going to be honest, this is actually part of the side of business that I like this side. I mean, I like the product side too, but I like that side of it. I like, and so, you're going to have to get comfortable, cold approaching people, at least for a lot of businesses, or figuring out ways to get your product in front of people. And you're probably going to need to be clever about it. You're going to need to have a thick skin because you're going to be wrong a lot. You're going to get rejected a lot, but if you keep at it and you persevere and you're curious and you try, you'll get through these things. And so, certainly intelligent, these problems are solvable by intelligent and curious people, even if it's not their natural, disposition.
As much as I am enjoying this line of discussion, I do want to change gears here and talk about the LPNH. So I'm kind of curious, basically, as an institution, with your work with them, what do you hope to achieve with them? And what are your thoughts on some of its controversies? To drop one just right off the top of my head, I know that they caused a lot of controversy with a certain tweet regarding Meghan McCain and John McCain's casket. Now, I do know a lot of people, took offense at this, but before we get into that, I also want to provide some backstory here about, John McCain as a person that these people are so quick to defend here. Just to the record, John McCain was extremely, supportive of the Iraq War. He has made statements that, Donald Trump's, worst could not really compete with. For example, in the 80s, John McCain was caught, was essentially cracking jokes about a woman being essentially sexually abused, sexually violated by a gorilla. He made a comment in the 90s about Chelsea Clinton, the daughter of, Bill and Hillary Clinton, saying that basically, why is Chelsea Clinton, 18 years old at the time, so ugly? Because her father is Janet Reno, very classy guy. He said during his running for president in 2000, he said that I hate the racial slur for the Asian community. I will hate them for as long as I live. Which had caused some backlash for him as well. So I do say that a lot of these people who aren't even, on his side politically to begin with, but are so quick to defend him, to put this type of sanctity behind his name, should really understand the type of person he is before they essentially jump in and jump at the LPNH's throat. But basically, what is your take on that?
Yeah, sure. So, speaking generally, and look, LPNH would say has posted things that I don't even like, but let's talk about. But I still like that they do that. I still like that they do it. So let me. Although I defend the McCain take very hard, but to sort of zoom out, because this what the defense or sort of the argument I'm going to give would apply to a wider body of them. What I think that there's an intent to do is to sort of invalidate this existing moral framework and to show that this other moral framework is possible. So there's there's one way of sort of persuading people that's you try to meet them entirely where they are, and you exist within their value framework. And so you're trying to say, well, within your own value framework, like here's why these conclusions or these other ideas are correct. That's not what LPNH is trying to do at all. LPNH is trying to show that this radically different framework and worldview is possible. And we are trying to act consistently, although there's a bunch of people on the account, so the account is also a little bit schizo at times because we don't always agree with one another. But we like that, though. Like, it's not an internal problem. But but we're trying to show that, like, this other way of looking at things, is okay. And I think inside of libertarian ethics, inside of the libertarian moral worldview, the vast majority of politicians are like incredibly evil people, right? Now, there's a bunch of worldviews in which that's not true, but inside of our worldview, it is true. And LPNH, I think, is mostly skeptical of the ability for libertarians to win elections. We see ourselves as free staters first, so we're very bought in this libertarian concentration movement inside of New Hampshire. And so we want to attract people who share our values and are attracted to the fact that we believe in these values strongly and we don't back down in the support of those values. And this is another thing that's very special, because this is another thing that's very special about New Hampshire. Like, I have people who I used to be friends with in my 20s who don't like me anymore because I'm now open. I don't even think my views have changed that more. I just don't hold back. Whereas my life in New Hampshire, friends, active social life, plenty of things to do. And that's because, and that doesn't mean people agree with, again, literally everything LPNH says or literally everything I say. But libertarians tend to be at least tolerant towards, arguing and discussing, these kinds of things. And it's not, the idea that we should, dance on the grave of an evil politician when they die is certainly in bounds. Inside of the New Hampshire libertarian movement. And that's part of what we're trying to showcase, is that you can believe these things, you can say these things, and it's perfectly fine. And if I or the party is able to say fairly radical things, and then look, I'm still here, I still have a good life, I have I have friends, I have family, then what we're actually showing is that those attacks, I'm immune. You can't hurt me. You can get mad at me on the internet, but you can't affect me at all, right? And so I think there's a sort of power in demonstrating that, and so there is an intent of kind of trying to demonstrate that, because it's important if our movement is to succeed. We also have to have it is a political movement, and in that sense, it's a legal movement. We're trying to change the legal structure of society, but I think it has to have a cultural access as well. You have to change. You want to change the culture, and so that there is an intent, with some of these posts to change the culture.
People seeing, the LPNH making these statements, and getting through these relatively unscathed, and having the courage to actually come out and say these things, it may very well motivate other people, other, liberty-minded people, to take a more, an approach that's more in line with that as well. Now, in terms of strategy, some people might oppose this. They might say that, by making these statements, it gives certain people that you're arguing against an opportunity to essentially clutch at pearls rather than providing an actual rebuttal to the argument being made. I think we saw this with the Nina Turner tweet as well about her picking crops.
Sure, but we're not really trying to argue with anyone, right? That's the thing. So the frame to view pretty much the behavior of LPNH is we're New Hampshire maximalists. And so the question is what we're doing helping attract the right kind of person to New Hampshire? And sort of secondarily, is it helping repel the wrong kind of person from New Hampshire? And when I say wrong kind of person, I'm not trying to turn off other libertarians. Okay, other libertarians need to not get their panties in a bunch about LPNH. there's plenty, if you like, there's plenty of, sort of more traditional, classical liberal or sort of more polite style within the Free State movement, broadly. But I want New Hampshire to have a certain reputation. This is actually another way of sort of understanding it. There's like a keystone to a lot of my social media and marketing behavior. I'm trying to create a reputation for New Hampshire. I want that reputation to be good as far as libertarians are concerned. And I want it to be bad if you're not a libertarian, right? I want if a socialist or a leftist like takes a job in New Hampshire, and I want them to like go to Thanksgiving dinner and, oh, you live in New Hampshire? Like there? Like why would you live there? That state's so awful, right? And like Texas and Florida are states that like kind of have these reputations. And I don't think these are, Florida's a pretty decent state. I think Texas has a reputation that far exceeds its actual ability or actual like status. But like they have the reputation, right? Like, and that reputation is incredibly productive in terms of how it changes the demographics of the state moving forward. So, like I don't want transgender people in New Hampshire to be in danger, right? Like I don't want violence to be enacted against them. But there is this woman who who's like, I have to move out of New Hampshire because my child is in danger. She has like a transgender kid or something, which is ridiculous. But my child is in danger. I need to leave New Hampshire. I'm like, and this is like, to me, like, this is amazing. Like, this is everything that I want for the state, reputationally. Smart libertarians can look into the law and find out whether the letter of the law is true or whatever. But like, what we want is a reputation that turns away bad people, right? And, pretty much anyone has a transgender child is like not going to share my political beliefs. And so if that kind of person is turned off from coming to New Hampshire, I think that's amazing. And so that's what I want the state to have, that reputation. And if that means we have to be perceived of as like a little bit crazy, kooky, dangerous, whatever, I don't care. Because it continues to shift the demographics of the state, even if it's just a little bit. And that's very good. I also think it's helped sort of change the Overton window, within the state, as well. It gives, if it lets other people, feel more comfortable again when they see we do things and there aren't actually that many consequences to them. And also, so many agreeable people do this temperature taking thing where they just like average the opinions of everyone in the room. And so, if the average temperature is here and you're trying to get people, over here, it makes sense to go way over here because that pulls people, towards the average where you actually want them to be.
Yes, I do think that, from what I'm seeing here, the LPNH is working to create an environment that incentivizes the right liberty-minded behavior and does everything in its power to repel, very much the authoritarian mindsets. And this actually kind of going back to LiquidZulu, this reminds me of a conversation I had with him once where I was talking to him about what is his approach, to when he debates people. Is his goal simply to persuade the person that he's talking about? And I thought, well, if that's the case, aren't they, if you're going after these people with too much force, will they just dig in their heels? And he explained to me that no, his goal is not necessarily to persuade that one person by essentially appealing to their own particular sensibilities. His goal is roughly, I'm not quoting him verbatim here, but basically to essentially destroy that person in front of the whole audience so that the people who hold their views will see what's happening to this person and then they will change. So basically, in a way, it's almost a numbers game, really. He's not concerned with the other person's, feelings or anything like that, or trying to, appease their ego or anything, but basically just to put them down in a way, like if he has to, that will allow the people around them, their followers, maybe other people who hold the same views, to recognize, well, I don't want to end up like this person, to make a cautionary tale out of them in a certain way. And I feel like there's something of a corollary there between that and, the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire's approach to dealing with people who are opposition to them.
Yes, that's absolutely true. your social media interactions in generally, when they're between two people, are usually for third parties rather than for the two people who are actually having the interaction, which is a weird way to think about it. But I think I'm comfortable saying that that's usually the case. I'll say it's often the case. I mean, there are clear exceptions to this. Sometimes you're really having a real, one-on-one conversation with the person you're talking to, and you're really trying to exchange information or get each other's perspectives or whatever. But a lot of times these are at least semi-performative interactions that are actually for the third parties who are observing the interactions. So I think there's absolutely an aspect of that, and yeah, there is. It's not the safest strategy, but there is a benefit to being a little bit of a bully. Like, people are scared of you, and it's not. Again, I don't think that therefore justifies, like, you're breaking certain moral bounds, or being, particularly, cruel or harsh necessarily. But yeah, like if people are, and again, it depends. If you it's probably not good, to have that reputation, say, inside of your own family necessarily. But in terms of, at large, if people, if people feel that there's going to be a cost, to opposing you, then you've changed their incentive structure, And so I think that there is a reward to being seen as, again, dangerous isn't the right word, but like that there's a cost to coming at you, right? And I think a lot of people have seen that if you come at LPNH, you're going to get it back. And maybe they're like, oh, I disagree, but I don't want to get it back, And so, yeah, there's a strength that comes from that. There's a danger, right? The danger of this approach is that you lose the ability, there's a number of dangers. One is you can lose your ability, like your truth-seeking ability, because you're no longer getting, if people are scared of you, then you're no longer going to get honest arguments and honest feedback. And that's important because you've got to continue to adjust and find the truth and so on. And so that's a big downside. And then the other downside is, if people do have a problem with you, they may not voice it, and then you get this sort of behind the scenes, gathering of oppositional forces, and you may turn people into opponents that you didn't actually want to turn into opponents. So, I mean, for anyone who doesn't like some of the LPNH stuff, but is actually a libertarian, like, we don't consider you our opponents, so, like, don't make us one. And that's not a threat. I'm not trying to make that as a threat here. Like, this is all stupid. Like, it's a strategy. We're trying to achieve a certain end. If you don't like it, I welcome other approaches and other strategies. There's an account on X now that's like, I think it's like wholesome New Hampshire memes, or like, it's nothing but wholesome Free State posts. It's like, look, if you don't like the brash stuff, like, mute the account or block the account and pay attention to the stuff that you like. It's a mistake to try to get everyone within your movement to, abide your exact strategy. You've got to at least tolerate, if someone shares the outcomes that you want and you disagree on their tactics or their strategy, then I think it's generally good to give them some space, unless you feel like what they're doing is somehow really, really getting in the way of what you're doing. And that's almost not the case, right? I do think LPNH has generated some negative press, and I can see people not liking it, but there's no one who lost an election because of anything that LPNH said, right? Like, there's no one. We've had some LPNH members lose jobs, but I don't think we've had anyone outside of New Hampshire lose a job over anything that LPNH said. And so, like, I think this idea that like LPNH has caused costs, for other people is mostly a contrived phenomenon, and is actually mostly motivated by, I would like, similar to tying it back to the earlier discussion, like, I would like to move up the internal libertarian hierarchy, and I can do that, by attacking and stepping on LPNH, right? So like there's an ability to present, but I don't think there's any, in terms of libertarians succeeding externally, I think LPNH has only helped. So.
And like you're saying, the door is always left open. If somebody has a different approach, then naturally, can they make a case for it? Are they able to communicate that, maybe we should take a different approach than the LPNH is taking? Then at least there's some room for some back and forth there. It's not like we're shutting down conversation entirely. Like there is no form of, mediation between these different schools of thought.
Yeah. So, and this is something I've also noticed, both with myself and LPNH, is like, there'll be these people who develop a problem, like, and they also don't want to talk about it. Like they're just completely convinced that they're, that they're correct. And for me, both in terms of my own, stuff in LPNH, like I'm trying to get an outcome. Like there's an outcome that I want, so to me, it's like, these should mostly be, like relatively like scientific and like not too emotional. Like, is this working or is it not? Like, is it achieving the ends that we want, or is it not? But very few of the people I've found who have a problem, like, want to like really have that discussion. They want to do the gang up thing and like, let's throw rocks at this guy, thing. I think there has been, even there was like, a spaces that we had with like Dave Smith at one point, and I get along, pretty well with Dave. I like what he's done and what he's doing, generally speaking. And like, even there, I did feel that like we weren't really having a real conversation. Like Dave had, and a totally reasonable allegiance, to certain factions, and had to do his diligence of like, but it wasn't, the realm. Because I have a scientific, mindset. What's true and what's not true. Let's find the truth. And honestly, it's even inside the libertarian sphere, I find that it's often like, these people are that way in a lot of things, but then when it comes to achieving their political outcomes, they go back to being political, creatures, who are, you're doing the sort of like tribal thing and like, how do I move up the hierarchy thing and all these things that aren't the scientific, like what's true and what's not true, like, and a kind of thing. And so I think very few of the conflicts that people have had with LPNH or me are actually motivated by truth-seeking behavior. I think they're motivated by status-seeking behavior. And for people who disagree with that, I am happy to talk about it. And if there have been like, real criticisms, I try to also obey a kind of like tit for tat strategy, which is if you are being reasonable and want to have the like reasonable, calm discussion, like I try to always match that tone. But and that's actually my preferred way of communicating and interacting generally. It's just that empirically, right, factually, social media is a wrestling ring, and if you don't smash people with chairs, then you're not playing the game right and you're not succeeding at the game. And so like if you like everything to be polite and nuanced and careful, like that's fine, but that's not what Twitter is for. Like you can do that on Twitter, because I do that. I do long posts, I do effort posts, I do factual posts, but I also do chair smashing posts. And honestly, the chair smashing posts almost always outperform the thoughtful intellectual posts. So I try to keep it mixed to show that I'm interested in both things, but the chair smashing, has got to have a place. It's just what the arena. It's just the rules of the game.
In regards to chair smashing as a concept, I do know that, fairly recently, you seem to be embroiled in something of a controversy that was a little unprecedented compared to other ones regarding Kamala Harris's campaign. So basically, after a certain tweet, the FBI essentially went after you, and to put it quite frankly, the Gestapo, they went after you for words, and I want to emphasize words here about, Kamala.
There's actually no clear evidence about why they came. The FBI did not disclose why they came. They still haven't disclosed why they came. So,
do you personally believe that there's a connection?
I think, as a matter of policy, LPNH again doesn't disclose who makes certain tweets. There's a number of posts that, like, I have somehow become the face of this account. I think because I have the most prominent individual persona. But a ton of the posts that people want to put on me or give me credit for would maybe be a better way to put it, aren't actually from me. Okay. So there's a lot of posts that are made by a lot of people, and we as a policy, don't disclose, who made individual posts. I think that they wanted to create a chilling effect from that visit. I think it backfired, to be clear, but I think that making a leap that they have not been willing to make publicly about specifically why they came is actually in their interests. And so, I don't want to do that.
Right.
Now, abstractly, I'm happy to say, similar to the John McCain one, that I think there are a lot of politicians who are very evil, and I would not be sad at all, if bad things, happened to those people. So, and I think that I will say, again, as like a meta point here as well, I think it's very interesting how people like we like celebrating the 4th of July. We had a Tea Party movement. We have all this talk about standing up to tyrants. We have our pine tree flags, our Mullen Law flags. Our snake flags, I guess it's flags. It's like, and COVID we had the massive COVID tyranny, and like the only actual plot to harm a government official was planned by the FBI, right? And so, and if you ever speak in like present tone terms and not like, so we can laud the past and celebrate the past, and we celebrate these past acts of violence, and despite there being like far more tyranny today, if you were to like even gently talk about your people scream fed, and people get mad at you, and I think that's just like logically inconsistent, right? That does not make sense. We are experiencing as much tyranny today, as like basically any time in American history. And so, I think we're doing, our enemies a disservice, when we jump down our own throats, jump of our own team members, when people, want to talk that way. I don't want, a civil war, or particularly bloody, actions. But like the whole point of the firearm, of individual firearm ownership, like is supposed to be like a check on tyranny of politicians. And so this idea that it could never be suggested in the current era, like I do reject that, and I think people should feel comfortable talking about it and not get mad if someone does.
Obviously, you are not an especially violent person. You are not somebody who's, enough of I would say is nowhere near enough of a physical threat that, they would warrant this type of gathering from them. We can say that you've masterfully handled that, the unwillingness of the FBI there to answer any of your questions, they know who you are, but they aren't willing to tell you who they are. Even though they're the ones who are initiating this interaction, I think does reveal how one-sided their particular mentality is. So I do think that you did a great job of, standing your ground and essentially, pushing back against them. So I'm just kind of curious here, what exactly, what was the approach you went into this with? Did you have some, is this generally a rule you apply? A lot of people, for example, there are a lot of rules, certain rights we might not be aware that we have. So for example, a lot of people think we can only make one particular phone call when we get arrested, when in reality there's not actually truth to that. The police have long been essentially counting on people to be ignorant of their own rights. So just as a closing case here, what case would you like to make for people? What should they know if they're going up against the state? What type of information should they be armed with when opposing, essentially authoritarian overstepping of boundaries?
Yeah, so I think if that's the kind of thing that you want to be comfortable doing, what I actually suggest to people is that they try to, to practice it in like milder interactions when the downside is like clearly bounded. So for example, if you go through, a DUI checkpoint, and you're sober, like the like maximum thing, like the most you could mess it up is like they take away an hour of your life. You're not gonna end up, you're not gonna end up dead. You're not gonna end up in jail. And so it's a chance to like, try not talking to them. try asserting your rights strongly. Like try approaches like everything gets better, with practice. And but you should be careful to do it like when when the facts are on your side. If you're going through the DUI checkpoint, do not be the exact opposite. If you've had a couple of beers or something. People might be surprised that people see me as like this, like sort of like firebrand, like kind of guy or whatever. If I get pulled over and I was speeding, I'm incredibly polite, and very respectful. I'm not this guy who's like yelling at cops all the time. I think it's all like very contextual, and this again, maybe I'm popular. Like I think plenty of what cops do is good and correct. And in my, private libertarian utopia, like I would like to hire some of those people privately and voluntarily to keep helping maintain the order of society, so so like often the right approach with authorities is to be deferential and to be polite. But if you're someone who wants to be comfortable confronting them, like do it when it's safe. When you're coming back to America from a foreign country, the most they can detain you for is 24 hours. I asked them that once and they sent me to a special area. They actually only held me for like 90 minutes. But they clearly did not like, this was one of my earlier times practicing, because I was like, I don't know, I was like probably in my mid-20s or something, and I was like, it's like, why are you asking me? Like, I'm an American. I've got to answer all these questions, like about like what I was doing while I was about. And I'm not. And again, I'm not even a no borders guy. So I'm not even saying like that like an authority shouldn't potentially have like some ability to inspect certain things. Although I don't know how I feel about that. But like some of the questions, like when you're asked coming back into the U.S., are like completely absurd. Like there's no. So I'm like just talking to the TSA guy, like, well, what do I want to answer this? Like, what happens? What happens when I answer? And I was actually being polite in this case. I wasn't trying to be like, you thug. But I ended up in the special screening area, and they wasted some of my time. But it turns out they can only hold you for up to 24 hours. So if you ever come back into America, then do you want to say hi? Okay, I got a butt to wipe. So maybe that's a good thing. I'm done.
Well,
but you can oh yeah, they'll only hold you for 24 hours. Like you can come back in internationally, refuse to answer any question. They have the right to hold you for 24 hours and then they let you go. Now, I've never done that myself, but that's an example where the upper bound of like what the authority can do to you. And so if you want to practice, not because like they're very authoritative, they got the guns, the whole thing is designed to intimidate you, and it's a chance to practice, asserting yourself a little bit. And I don't think like if that had been my first interaction with with authorities, in that fashion, I don't think I would have been able to do it the way that I did. And so, but because I had some in my past, I felt more comfortable, asserting my rights, in that way.
Right. Very well said. Those are definitely insights that a lot of us can certainly take to heart in our own future experiences, that if we may have them against, any particular police or authority figures. But I do know that since we are out of time, I do just want to say thank you for the appearance, Jeremy. And thanks to everybody for listening in. This has been Morgan Meets the Eye. Make sure to follow Jeremy Kauffman and certainly keep up with the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire. And of course, make sure to subscribe, comment, and above all, keep asking why. Everybody out there, have a good one. Bye-bye.